Dwayne McLemore here at the state, one of the editors here. Joined today for a live question and answer session with Captain Adam Myrick with the Lexington County Sheriff's Department. Adam is the Public Information Officer for the Sheriff's Department. He's also a Washington Redskins fan, and we won't hold that against him, at least not right now. Adam, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Can you speak to what the last 2 months have been like, for you personally and professionally?
Sure, Dwayne. As we get started here, if I may very quickly just say it is really a pleasure to be here with you on behalf of Sheriff Jay Kuhn as we have this opportunity to talk with you and your colleagues there at the state, and also others who live and work in Lexington County and travel through our county here. And in terms of what we've experienced over the last 2 months, like you guys there in the newsroom and like everybody watching us here, it has been unlike anything we've ever experienced. It's been very unexpected. There have been a lot of plans written and a lot of things talked about through the years in terms of law enforcement and public safety response to this incident or this type of situation or this call. However, a pandemic is one of those that for a lot of us, we didn't really have a lot of information about going into it. So we have had to make adjustments on the fly like a number of other people. But going into this, Sheriff Kuhn was had a lot of foresight up front and was very instrumental in our preparation in terms of getting ready for what we expected to be a significant change in our community. And of course, it very much was. And we went into it expecting to see an increase in particular crimes. And then also we knew that there would be a lot of opportunities for us to interface with our community with all of the different changes and just a different way of living life that we've all had to experience over these past couple of months. But we have a great community here in Lexington County, and thus far, as we've navigated through this, it's really been, all things considered, a pretty smooth process for the department.
Again, if you're joining us here with Adam Myrick, the PIO, Public Information Officer for the Lexington County Sheriff's Department. If you have questions, please leave them here on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're joining us. I've got a few more for him. Adam, you and I were talking about when the stay-at-home order first came out, there was sort of some confusion. I think people were worried that they were going to have to provide some sort of documentation if they got pulled over. Can you speak to some of that, maybe some of the early confusion that you guys had to deal with?
I don't have you on audio right now. I'm not able to hear you.
Do you see the private chat? You got your phone in front of you?
The types of calls that we have seen over the course of the pandemic have been what we would typically see. And a lot of those calls have been maybe a little bit different, though, because some of them have focused on the restaurants and the businesses and what can be open, what is allowed, how many people are allowed, and so forth. So as we look back on some of the things over the course of the last several weeks that have been most prominent among those calls is it has been, first and foremost, we got a lot of calls after the work or home order issued by Governor McMaster about whether people needed some type of documentation from their job or from their employer to allow them to drive back and forth to work. There was actually a thought out there, and a rather prominent thought, that we would be stopping vehicles and checking on people, seeing where they were going, and trying to make a decision on whether or not they were going to work or going to home. And that's just simply something that we were never going to do that, and never had to do that, of course. And so the thing we found on that front is that everybody, generally speaking, was very much in a self-policing mode. They were doing the right thing and really listening to all the briefings and trying to get all of the current information that they could get and abiding by that as best they could. So everybody did a really good job of that. And another thing that we faced in terms of public calls and those different calls for service during this unusual time were those individuals who were concerned about a particular store maybe being over its capacity, or the capacity that was allowed under the governor's order, to limit it based on the amount of square footage and based on some of the fire marshal recommendations and the percentage thereof. So we got a couple of calls on that and have checked on that. But by and large, most of these type calls that we received and that we ended up responding to, all of them, of course, they really turned out to be a simple conversation. We would share with someone what the governor's order was. We would emphasize the need to make sure they took that step and maintain that proper capacity, or that percentage of their capacity, in the interest of slowing the spread and flattening the curve, and all of those phrases that we heard. When it comes to the more serious crimes, if you will, those calls that we're going to get any and all the time, day to day, outside of a pandemic and outside of situations related to responses to COVID-19, the domestic calls, the larceny calls, and those type things. We went back and took a look at some of our numbers, and as it turns out, it was really virtually equal with the same time period in 2019. So we looked somewhere mid-March to mid to late April or so, 2020 versus 2019, it was almost the exact same. And Sheriff Kuhn knew that we potentially would have some things to take a look at and consider when it came to a lot of students being home from school, obviously not going to class. They were home from school. Sometimes in the summer, it's certainly not unusual to see some calls related to teenagers doing different things, just getting into different stuff and being kids overall, most of us would say, but nonetheless doing some things that we need to check up on and look into. And we had a very, very good situation. If you have to find a silver lining in the school shutdown, it would be that provided us with about 35 or so more deputies than we would normally have, because with school resource officers not in schools, not having to be there, we could then integrate them into a regular patrol shift. So what that did is it increased our visibility, it increased our presence, and as a result, again, we really didn't see anything outside of the statistical norm that we would expect to see from one time period in 1 year following over to the same time period in the next year.
Can you hear me now? I'm gonna text you this question, let you get ready for it. If you guys have any questions out there, leave them on our Facebook or YouTube chats. Bristow, one of my colleagues, wants to know, how is Lexington County enforcing the social distancing requirements, or what do you expect as far as these restaurants start to reopen?
When it comes to the social distancing, it really has been one of those situations where most individuals have been very much in a self-policing mode, if you will. They have been very understanding. We have had to break up some congregations of groups here and there, but by and large, people have been listening to the recommendations from the CDC, from the governor, at the federal level as well, of course, and here at the local level too. They have been paying attention to those good old-fashioned public health tips. And they've been washing their hands, they've been staying home if they're sick, and they have not been gathering in groups. There have been some occasions where we have had to go and maybe break up a little bit of a social gathering at a residence. Maybe some people congregating in a parking lot just to talk and catch up and not really have anything else to do. So they've chosen a particular parking lot to settle down in for the evening and maybe just kind of catch up and hang out. So there have been some occasions where we've had to do that. But by and large, it has been very much a situation where everybody is mindful of what they need to do. And we just, at times, though, have had to go in and just have a conversation. And for the most part, people have been very understanding. And the same can be said for what we've had to do in the restaurants. There have been some occasions where some diners have been able to eat inside before, under the current order, where you cannot have interior dining or inside dining per the governor's order. And those calls have resulted in, again, just conversations where we've had to go in and remind people this is something that currently is still not allowed under the governor's order. And overall, people have been very understanding and appreciative of our efforts, and then also making sure they do the next thing. So really, it's been a situation where we've had just conversations with people and issued some reminders.
Next question from me, just as it relates to the lake, which is obviously a big deal. With Lake Murray, a big deal in Lexington County. Can you speak to, what goes on there, what police are concerned about? I know that was a big issue with when the orders were coming down, and then of course we were reminded yesterday of some of the dangers of boating and what the lake presents with the death of a boater. Can you sort of speak to Lake Murray and how that comes into play with what the Sheriff's Department does?
Well, the lake and the activity on the lake, the boating and other stuff was really a concern early on, and it was a source of a lot of questions. We received a lot of non-emergency calls about what could be done on the lake. And as it stands now, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources has put out some really great and very easily read and digested resources on that, what can be done. So anything that we did early on was in support of that state agency, as we have that Marine Patrol presence on the lake, and we help them out there on the waters of the Lexington County waters of Lake Murray throughout the summer season. So there was a time early in the pandemic, or at least early in the part of the pandemic response, that led to some changes on the water. And that was pretty simple at the time. You couldn't congregate on the water in much the same way you couldn't congregate, say, in a parking lot or in a store, or certainly inside of a restaurant because of the shutdowns. You couldn't do the same thing on the lake. And I would point anybody toward the Department of Natural Resources social media and their website for the latest on that. In terms of the dam area, which again, of course, is in Lexington County and a part of our patrolling area, we know that people are going to want to continue to get outside and exercise. The dam has, the sidewalk, the walking area there on the dam has never been closed. That's open for anybody who wants to go out there and enjoy that. And we know that's an important thing during this time, because we can only take being inside our houses for so long, and we have to get out and enjoy some fresh air and get moving and get some exercise. And so that's something that certainly is available there on the dam, and we welcome people to do it, keeping in mind the current guidelines and the best public health recommendations of social distancing, and making sure that they, if they're not out there, if they feel sick, and making sure that families, if you live in the same household, it's okay to stick together, but maybe a good idea to be extra cautious if you're out there, maybe with a friend who you don't live with, or another extended family member who you don't live with. It's really all about, if you live in the same household, go out and do what you want to do and enjoy yourself and enjoy time with your family. But if you do have some activities planned with somebody outside of your household, that's what the public health experts are saying to be cautious about.
Another question from Facebook, from Nikki, one of my colleagues, talking about really in line with the quarantine question. I know, just speaking personally, as odd as it sounds, I'm around my wife and kids more than I have ever been, working from home. And I had an old Sunday school teacher who once told me that the reason that his marriage had lasted so long was because he and his wife worked opposite schedules. So can you speak to sort of the quarantine nature of people being around each other, and maybe an uptick in domestic violence calls that maybe you may or may not have seen, or law enforcement in general?
Well, Dwayne, I'm sorry, I'm still having some audio problems, but I saw one of the questions pop up about domestic violence, and I can jump on that while we maybe try to iron out some of these technical issues that are bound to happen sometimes with technology. And the question was from Nikki, asking about, have we seen any sort of increase in domestic violence incidents over the course of the time we've been quarantining, and really with the staying home and working from home and trying to limit our outside time? The simple answer is we haven't. We've run those numbers as well specifically, and over, again, the same time span between mid-March or so to very late April, we saw roughly the same amount. I think it was within 3 or 4, 130 something last year during that same time span, 128, 29 or something like that for this time span, or maybe reversed. But just to clarify, it's been absolutely right on track with what we would seen, and just a few incidents different over the same time period this year. So we did not see, and thus far have not seen, that uptick in domestic violence calls. And that's something that we were certainly prepared for and still are prepared for. And one of the ways we've prepared for that and for other calls, no matter what nature they may be, is we have beefed up our telephone reporting unit. We call it our TRU, and that stands for telephone reporting unit. And what that is an option if you have a situation where, in your best guess, it doesn't, and according to your gut feeling and your preference, if it doesn't require a deputy to come out in person, and if you feel like you don't need that, certainly we'll come if you need that, or if you ask us, we're on the way, we will do that. But in this situation, let's think about this. You have had a lawnmower stolen out of your storage building in the backyard sometime over the last 3 or 4 days. You don't know when it was. You'd like to have that report. You need an incident report, maybe for insurance purposes or just for your own personal records. You can call us, and we have beefed up that telephone reporting unit to take calls and generate incident reports that way. And that's one of the ways we have responded to and made some adjustments to our operations during this time. I do want to underscore, though, and Sheriff Kuhn has made this very clear from the time he announced it, that if you need a deputy, if you want a deputy, if it's your preference to have the deputy come out and face-to-face, take that report, get that information directly with you, and get that in-person customer service, we're certainly going to do that. And we will do that just as we've done before the pandemic and before we beefed up that telephone reporting unit. And certainly something that the sheriff made clear in announcing it is we're going to always respond, as we always have, to any sort of emergent calls, any sort of in-progress crimes, anything that's happening in the moment or you think might be happening in the moment. Don't hesitate to call 911, because we are going to come to those, as we always have and as we always will.
Next question comes from Crystal from Facebook. With graduation ceremonies back in place, what will your department's involvement be in the ceremonies? What can we as parents do to make it easier on everybody? You read that okay?
Okay. Talking about graduation ceremonies, a number of the districts in Lexington County have announced those, and they are trying to sort out their plans for that. The question there is, what is going to be our involvement in those ceremonies, and how can we, or how would we advise parents to make it easier on everybody? Our involvement will be what they would typically be. We'll be there to, in a role to make sure that everything is okay, make sure that everyone remains safe and secure, just as we would at any other large event at a high school. Think basketball games, football games, any sort of event that's on campus, or any sort of large gathering of a lot of people. So that will be our involvement, again, much as it would be on a typical fall Friday night, or sometime through the winter for a basketball game or other athletic event or other social event at a school. The best recommendation would be, what we would say is, just be patient and understand this is going to be a little bit different, because there haven't been graduation ceremonies on campus in an outdoor football stadium that I'm aware of in a long time around here. And so that's going to be different, because typically they're the arena downtown in Columbia. So it's going to be different from a traffic perspective. Of course, we'll help on that as we need to as well. And then the schools will certainly be issuing some recommendations to parents and other guests in terms of ticketing and how to make sure you get your graduate there, and where all the details of where that will need to take place. But what we would recommend is just continue to follow what the schools and what the school districts are issuing, and then make sure you follow those good guidelines and those recommendations from the public health experts and the doctors out there that know the best way, and that are recommending those easy steps we can take to help slow the spread of COVID-19. That's what's going to be key in these type large gatherings or any others going forward.
I thought that was a good question from Crystal, because the Lexington School District 1 has the biggest schools in our area, so that's something certainly to watch for, just how things come together, and I'm sure it will be an experience for everybody, to say the least. Ethan has our next question. Let's see what Ethan has. Are the islands of Lake Murray going to open back up? What can you say about that?
The islands within Lake Murray, I'm not sure. The best thing to do on that would be to check with Dominion Energy. It's my understanding that most of those are owned by Dominion. There may be a few that are not actually owned by the utility, but I'm not exactly sure of Dominion's plans on that. Now, keep in mind, whatever Dominion may choose to do with those still would be contingent on practicing good physical distancing and making sure there's no congregating and that sort of thing. So there are some things that we know are going to be inherent when we begin getting back to whatever normal looks like and whatever the new normal may shape up to be. But the best thing to do is to, I think in terms of keeping a watch on the islands, is watch DNR's webpage and their social media. We'll certainly share what they share, and if we hear anything as well because of our involvement and certainly the assistance we provide to them on the lake, we'll share that. But then keep an eye on what Dominion shares as well, because once that all begins opening up, they're certainly going to let as many people around the area know, because they want as many people as they can to be out there and make sure that they're able to enjoy the great resource that we have out there at Lake Murray.
Sending you my next question now, just as it relates to sort of these next few weeks. You mentioned the new normal. What is next for police? What do you discuss as far as what the obstacles are? What may be ahead in terms of law enforcement as things start to reopen? People start to kind of get out and about. What is sort of next for police?
What that new normal like is, at this point, something that we're still going to have to feel out, and we're going to have to take a very slow and measured approach. And I know most of us have certainly heard Governor McMaster share, we're going to go with the data, we're going to go with the science, and those executive orders have been in line with that. And Sheriff Coon has recommended the same thing, that as we get back to whatever normal is and whatever that's going to look like, it's certainly going to be different, and it's certainly going to require us to take a very cautious and measured approach. And one of the great resources that we have here at the Sheriff's Department is we have an attorney who takes a look at those executive orders and the very complex language that they're written in, and he very carefully breaks them down, reviews them with his legal eyes and his legal mind, and then he shares them with those of us who are not attorneys and don't have quite that legal mind and that legal eye that he has, and he shares that with us here. And there certainly will be some instances where we have to do that in the coming days and the coming weeks, as things are going to change and they're certainly going to evolve, and we have to be ready for that. For instance, 2 months ago, or right around 2 months ago, none of us thought we would have to be thinking about what constitutes outside dining versus inside dining, what constitutes a patio at a restaurant and a true exterior dining area, and what doesn't. So we're having to take a look at that, and certainly many things over these recent weeks have been new and very novel to us. And we are going to, as we go forward, continue to be very cautious and make sure that we're doing what we need to do. But the great thing that I'll go back to again is the Lexington County community has been there with us. They have supported us, and they've certainly cooperated with us. And just the amount of support that we've seen from those in Lexington County who work and live here, those who travel through here, has been incredible. And we certainly expect that going forward, because we know we're all in this thing trying to figure out exactly what the new normal is going to look like, and trying to make sure we not only keep ourselves healthy, our families healthy, but our community as a whole healthy.
Here's a question from YouTube from Jordan that you may be able to answer. It's just talking about traveling to and from South Carolina. I know Columbia Metropolitan Airport said today that they're going to require passengers to wear masks coming in and out of the airport. So I don't know if, Adam, if you see that question, can you sort of speak to, maybe travel concerns, what a tourist maybe facing as far as a decision coming into the state?
Yeah, Jordan, the travel thing is a little bit outside of our wheelhouse here in local law enforcement and at the county level. But I would recommend that the best thing for you to do would be to check the Transportation Security Administration's website, and also check if you're going to be flying out of Columbia Metro, check that website. Anything, and also your airline's website. Anything that you need to know about travel, anything that you need to know about any sort of guidance that they have or documents that you may need would be available at one of those sources. Certainly the Transportation Security Administration, the Columbia Metropolitan Airport's website, there is a great resource that they have, and certainly your airline is going to be able to share that as well. Between those three, or among those three, you'll certainly be able to be equipped and make sure you have what you need to travel, and make sure you do so as safely as possible and remain healthy while you do that.
Sort of a last question from me, just asking you any final words of wisdom before we wrap up here, just something you may want to say to the public, or just reiterate that you've already said about, these next few days and weeks, what can we do as citizens? What can we do to help the police? What should we be on the lookout for? Any final words of wisdom?
I want to go back and just share with you and share with those who are watching the incredible cooperation and the support we receive from our community. And Sheriff Coon reminds us all the time, this isn't something we should take for granted. Not all departments and agencies in the law enforcement world have this. It's a little bit of an unusual thing in our profession, but it's an honor to serve in a community that so strongly supports law enforcement. And I think the steps that we'll need everybody to take, and the things that we'll need everyone to be aware of, are patience and change. It's going to be something that is going to be different. And to a large degree, we've already seen that. We've already been through things that we never expected. You think of all of the Easter dresses that are hanging in stores that are still closed. And Easter now was a few weeks ago. That just seems almost unfathomable to us, and we can't process that. Think of students being out of school this long. So going forward, we are fully expecting that continued support and that continued understanding. And as we mentioned at the top, we haven't had to take any sort of type of heavy-handed enforcement action for the most part on any of this, because it's been unusual. Those people who have needed to know what the different orders mean and needed to check on things have been extremely proactive in educating themselves, and we expect that to continue, and we're certain that it will. But we would also request that everyone continue to be patient and know that we're all in this thing trying to figure it out and working to keep everybody safe and secure. So whether we have a pandemic or not, whether we have numbers that continue to go up or whether we've peaked, no matter what the medical statistics show, we still have our job to do. We can't work from home in law enforcement. So we are continuing to be out there to meet community needs, to respond to emergencies, and do what it is that we do to protect and serve, because that's what we're committed to do. But as we go forward, we just hope people will continue to be patient and continue to be understanding and continue that support, because those things are some of the parts and some of the ingredients of what has made our time in navigating all of this here in Lexington County from a law enforcement perspective and a public safety perspective at large. It's what has made it, relatively speaking, very, very smooth over this unprecedented time.
Adam, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for you to come on and talking to our readers, our viewers, our subscribers. Thanks to the folks who joined us and watched. Thanks to those who asked questions. Certainly appreciate your time. Keep an eye out. We're trying to do these every week, either in the form of a video or live Q&A with in our comments on one of our stories. We're trying to line up folks for the coming weeks. I think we got one in the works next week that'll that folks will like. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for who's next. Come on and ask questions. We certainly appreciate you and especially our subscribers. And again, thanks. Stay safe and have a good week.